Hi, everybody. Welcome to the educational presentation about Enbridge's Line 3 put on by the Minnesota Democratic Socialists of America. My name is Tom. Along with Jacob and Ramira here, we will be presenting today. I am I'm from St. Cloud originally, but these days I am with Twin Ports DSA. I use masculine pronouns, and sometimes I can even make computers work. If my two co-hosts could introduce themselves.
Yeah, hi, I'm Rev Mira. I use they. I'm part of Cannon Valley DSA, and I've been involved in the Line 3 struggle since about 2018, mostly with Northfield against Line 3.
And hello, I'm Jacob Skull. I'm originally from Hibbing up on Minnesota's good old Iron Range, but I am currently the co-chair of the St. Cloud Democratic Socialists of America, and I use he, him pronouns.
All right. I've dropped the sign-in sheet for this event in the chat. You can also see a link for it on screen. That one's shortened so that you can actually type it in. If you are from an out-of-state chapter, that means that we do not have you on our Minnesota lists. So if you fill that in, we'd greatly appreciate it so that we can get in touch with you about Line 3 information and actions and all that good stuff after the webinar. I think that's about it for introductions, and we can hop right in, yeah? Ramira will be driving the slideshow today. So
Yes.
Ramira, if you could move us forward and we'll get started. Oh, I want my speaker's notes up. There they are. What are tar sands? Tar sands, also known as oil sands, are a mixture of mostly sand, clay, water, and a thick molasses-like substance called bitumen. Bitumen is made of hydrocarbons, the same molecules as liquid oil, and it is used to produce gasoline and other petroleum products, the way oil is. The Athabasca tar sands of Alberta, Canada, are the second largest oil deposit in the world, covering more land area than the United Kingdom. If the tar sands were a state, they would be the 27th largest in the United States, just behind Iowa and above New York. Extracting the tar sands is the largest industrial project on the planet and requires churning up the earth, resulting in massive deforestation of the boreal forest, which the tar sands sit under. Unlike conventional oil sources, tar sands are solid, not liquid, and they must be mined rather than drilled or pumped. The extracted mixture of sand, clay, and bitumen then needs to be processed into synthetic crude, a process that burns almost a third of all natural gas used in Canada, and uses 2.5 barrels of water for every barrel of oil, as well as producing these massive toxic tailings ponds, which are pictured here. These are supposed to contain the wastewater from bitumen extraction and refining, but they do tend to leak into the groundwater, into nearby streams, nearby rivers, nearby lakes. Unsurprisingly, this process makes tar sands oil expensive and earns it the dubious honor of producing the highest greenhouse gas emissions of any oil variant. Over the lifetime of the Line 3 pipeline, the burning of this dirty petroleum is calculated to be equivalent to having built 50 coal-fired power plants or putting 38 million vehicles on the road, a climate impact greater than the entire state of Minnesota. No rational economic or political system would have allowed this disastrous energy source to be exploited except for capitalism. You could move forward. What is Line 3? Line 3 is a major oil pipeline that transports tar sands crude from Alberta, Canada to Superior, Wisconsin. Line 3 carries bitumen mixed with a proprietary blend of other toxic chemicals from Edmonton, Alberta to Superior. The company behind Line 3, Enbridge Incorporated, is in the midst of the largest construction project in its corporate history, totaling 1,031 miles of pipe. This includes 13 miles in North Dakota, 14 miles in Wisconsin, and 337 miles in Minnesota. Although marketed as a replacement, this new Line 3, which you can see on the map there in red, is a brand new pipeline with increased capacity. And in Minnesota, the expansion follows a substantially different route than the existing pipeline, which I believe is in either purple or gray, blue. You can see it.
It's the darker blue, yeah.
Yeah, it's the darker blue. And this means that the new pipeline will destroy more forest, threaten more wetlands, rivers, and lakes in northern Minnesota. The original pipeline, which has been in disrepair for years, is going to be abandoned in the ground with no cleanup. Construction on the project began in December 2020 after our Democratic governor, Tim Walz, failed to take action to stop it, and permits were granted despite opposition from a broad range of groups, remarkably including the Minnesota Department of Commerce, which deemed the pipeline unneeded. Next. Bitumen is real bad stuff. It's normally too thick to be transported via pipeline, so it must be mixed with the aforementioned proprietary blend of chemicals to create diluted bitumen, or dilbit. This mixture is toxic and incredibly difficult to clean up when spilled. Bitumen is about the consistency of peanut butter, and the chemicals used to dilute it start to evaporate when it leaves the pipe. Instead of remaining on top of the water as most conventional crude oil will, bitumen gradually sinks to the bottom, where normal cleanup technologies and equipment are of little use. Federal regulations do not require pipeline operators to disclose that information, and when spills have occurred, Enbridge officials have not volunteered it to clean up crews. The new Line 3 is projected to have an initial capacity of 760,000 barrels of this stuff per day, and at peak capacity will carry 915,000 barrels per day of this toxic goop. Now I will pass you off to my co-host Jacob, who will be going to a little bit more detail about one of the largest inland oil spills in U.S. history, which was also tar sands and also Enbridge.
So this is not even close to the first pipeline that Enbridge has ever been involved in. Back in 2010, specifically on Sunday, July 25th of 2010, Enbridge had their line 6B near Marshall, Michigan, spill roughly 1.2 million gallons of oil. And that ended up blackening almost 36 miles of the Kalamazoo River, as well as 2 miles of Talmadge Creek. And while many people aren't really aware of this spill, it's one of the largest oil spills in US history. Next slide. So this specific stretch of the Kalamazoo River that was affected was known for being wild, serene, deeply treasured by the local community. It was rich in biodiversity and documented to be home to 102 species of fish, 23 species of mussels and clams, 218 species of birds, 40 species of mammals, and 40 types of amphibians and reptiles. And to this day, the cleanup process is still going on. Next slide. After the spill, nearby residents in Marshall, Michigan, woke up to bitumen gushing into their homes, their yards, and much of the surrounding areas. And bitumen would stick to the bottom of people's shoes almost like chewing gum. And an intense brown mist formed over the river, along with a really, really sickening stench, which caused headaches, sore throats, nausea, and vomiting for a lot of the local residents. And in order to combat the oil, they put benzene into it, and benzene is a cancerous chemical. And the point of the benzene was to help liquefy the oil in the river. But what that ended up doing was causing a lot of the toxic chemicals to just evaporate into the air instead, hence where you get a lot of the nausea and the headaches from. And because of this, a lot of the local residents were forced to evacuate from the area because of the severe health hazards that were caused by the accident. Forward. So the cleanup crew that had been sent in, they were expecting to deal with traditional light crude oil, but they ended up being faced with conditions they weren't really prepared for. So on August 17th of that year, 2010, 23 days after the pipeline had burst, the cleanup crews began to notice something that they hadn't seen at other oil spills. The surface of the river was clearing in some places, which is typically a sign of progress. However, when the sediment beneath the river was disturbed, globs of oil popped up, coating the surface of the river in oil again. And tar balls started forming along the bottom and bouncing along with the river, along the riverbed with the current. So what was happening at the spill site, it's pretty clear to us now. After 6B ruptured, the chemicals that were added to dilute the bitumen began evaporating, and the heavy bitumen itself began sinking. So when the surface of the river started clearing, it wasn't because the oil was gone, but because it had just disappeared from sight. And then Kari Leiderson, who was a former Washington Post reporter who at the time was writing for the Natural Resource Defense Council's quarterly magazine, actually spoke with Enbridge's CEO, Patrick Daniels, several times in August of 2010 and asked if the oil in the 6B pipeline was tar sands oil. And Patrick Daniel told her several times that it was not tar sands oil. And then which was a lie. Of course, it was tar sands oil. So as a result of this, federal and local officials didn't discover until more than a week after the spill that 6B was carrying dilbit. And Mark Durno, the Environmental Protection Agency deputy incident commander at the time, said that if Enbridge had provided more specific information about the chemical makeup of the oil, the EPA would have rushed sampling equipment to the scene so sampling could have begun immediately. Next slide. According to a US law, when corrosion rises above a certain threshold, companies like Enbridge are legally required to repair it within 180 days. But regulations are so lax that these companies can easily just keep negotiating perpetually for more time. Line 6B had 329 known defects at the time of the spill. And what's even crazier is that the location on 6B where the pipeline eventually ruptured wasn't even one of those 329 known defects. And 10 days before 6B ruptured, Enbridge, who had already applied for extensions in the past, applied yet again to the Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration for another extension. So let's think about this for a second. 10 days before the spill, Enbridge asked for an additional 2.5 years to decide whether 6B should be repaired or replaced. Forward. So on the day of the spill, July 25th of 2010, it's 5:57 p.m. In a control room 1,500 miles away from Marshall in Edmonton, Alberta in Canada, an alarm went off indicating that pressure had dropped to 0 near Marshall at the site of the 6B pipeline. Despite this, the control room operators weren't concerned, as they thought that just a large bubble had formed in the pipeline, and they figured that the bubble would only last until they restarted the pipeline early the next morning. So it's 4 a.m. Monday morning, 11 hours later, and the controllers in Edmonton restarted the pipeline as scheduled. And over the next hour, 6 more alarms went off. At that point, a pipeline analyst in the control room had said that 6B should be started again, but with more pressure, so that the oil would fill the line and overcome the bubble they thought was triggering the alarms. And then the shift leader on site then called for almost doubling the pressure on 6B, but the extra power wasn't available. And why wasn't the extra power available? Well, it's because there was a leak in the pipeline that wasn't discovered until 11:17 a.m., 7 hours after the pipeline was restarted, when an employee in Michigan, and one of the utility companies working on this, called Enbridge's emergency number. And what's even just more sinister is before Enbridge tried to contact the EPA's National Response Center, which was just after 1 p.m. after 2 hours of them having figured this out, 15 minutes before that, they called their own public affairs office in Houston to do damage control about the spill. Forward. So this whole disaster left more than 4,000 animals in need of assistance, cleaning and rehabilitation. Local fish and plant life suffered great losses, of which they still haven't fully recovered from. 5,500 cubic yards of oil-soaked sediment had to get dug up with heavy equipment, which was enough to fill 27 semi-trailers. 2 entire miles of Talmadge Creek were dug up and replaced, and efforts to recover the oil damaged 1,560 acres of in-stream habitat and 2,887 acres of floodplain forests. Even the efforts to just like remove the oil itself took more than 4 years, but the water and surrounding lands will permanently have traces of toxins because of the spill. The cleanup process also included ripping out oil-coated islands and logs, which deprived fish of shelter, and the steady beat of waves caused by so many boats on the river eroded the banks where muskrats and beavers traditionally burrowed for shelter. And, you know, on the human side of things, more than 310 properties, about half of them were people's homes, were left destroyed. And nearly 160 families were forced to relocate or were dislocated because of this. Forward. So what's really important to take away from this is that it's not even an isolated incident. This is a common pattern of behavior on behalf of Enbridge. Between 1999 and 2013, Enbridge has had over 1,000 spills throughout the United States, with many of those spills having been here in the state of Minnesota. And for example, all the spills that are listed on this slide that you can see are all spills that took place in Minnesota. And the spill that happened in Michigan is only seconded by the Grand Rapids spill of 1991, which is about 40 minutes from where I grew up here in Minnesota. Even Enbridge's own website admits that they had a total of 7 reportable spills on crude oil and liquid systems in 2019, 6 which were on Enbridge's property and 1 was offsite. And most recently, Enbridge had a spill near Fort Atkinson in Wisconsin that they failed to report to state and federal authorities for more than a year. The leak, which had occurred in 2019, was not reported until last summer. It contaminated at least 130 tons of soil, and toxic chemicals have been detected in the local groundwater at thousands of times the state limits, according to the Department of Natural Resources. Residents in that area also reported that Enbridge did not contact them at all for well water testing until news of the spill surfaced. What all this goes to show is that Enbridge has a history of and will more than likely continue to take zero responsibility in cleaning up any mishaps that may arise from this pipeline. You know, capitalist enterprises like Enbridge, they love to preach to working people like us, you know, personal responsibility and take actions that matters into your own hand. But when we do that, and God forbid that we want to threaten their profit margins by holding them accountable for the environmental crisis they create, suddenly it's a huge issue and we can't do anything about it. Forward. So moving on from the Kalamazoo spill, you know, another major issue presented by the Line 3 that they're planning or trying to build here in Minnesota is the plethora of Indigenous treaty rights that it poses to violate. So opposition to the expansion of Line 3 has existed among Native American communities and environmental and climate justice groups since Enbridge first proposed the expansion to Line 3 back in 2014. The new Line 3, new because it goes on a completely different path, threatens Ojibwe 1855 treaty rights to hunt, fish, and harvest on ceded lands. Wild rice is, of course, central to Ojibwe culture. And Line 3 destroys forests, it threatens rivers, especially the Mississippi River, where it is posed to build under it in 2 different locations. It will destroy pristine wetlands, primal rice beds, while crossing multiple rivers besides the Mississippi and lakes. It violates treaty rights by disrupting and threatening the resources promised to Indigenous people on their ancestral land. And another ramification about this that a lot of people may not immediately connect to the pipeline is the rates of missing and murdered Indigenous women. The rates for this are extremely high in Minnesota, and it's thought that the existence of what's called man camps occupied by oil workers directly increases the risk of sex trafficking and sexual abuse and violence for Indigenous women. Because of this, it's really easy to see why Native Americans, especially Indigenous women, with threats to their land, water, culture, and personal safety, are at the forefront of resistance to Line 3. And notably, in July of 2017, the Minnesota Department of Commerce's tribal liaison, Danielle Oxendine-Molliver, resigned from her position in protest of the Line 3 pipeline environmental review process. Molliver had said she was told that she could only be a greeter and not answer any questions about the pipeline's impacts on tribes after Enbridge had complained to the governor's office about her involvement. The old Line 3 currently runs through the Leech Lake and Fond du Lac reservations in Minnesota, and the route of the expansion, the new pipeline, would still go through the Fond du Lac reservation, and it would run through a disputed area that the White Earth Band claims is within its reservation, as well as many other areas ceded by tribes in the 1800s where they maintain hunting and fishing rights. And even in August of 2017, the Minnesota Department of Commerce published its final environmental impact statement for the Line 3 expansion. The environmental statement found that all of the Line 3 replacement project routes would have a, quote, disproportionate and adverse effect on tribal resources and tribal members. And that same report also further stated that, quote, all of the proposed routes, including either keeping the current Line 3 in place or abandoning it, would add to the negative mental, spiritual, and physical health impacts already disproportionately suffered by American Indian populations. And I will now hand it off to you, Revmira.
Right. Yeah, so Line 3 isn't the only tar sands pipeline. So here what we have is a map of some of the other tar sands pipeline projects going on across North America and basically like where they're at. So the Northern Gateway, which is that blue dotted line in the northern part of Alberta and British Columbia, has already been canceled. Trans Mountain, the Trans Mountain Pipeline Project, which is the red dotted line further south from Alberta to British Columbia, has also been delayed very significantly by resistance from First Nations in Canada, especially like the Wet'suwet'en. Justin Trudeau's government actually had to buy the pipeline to keep it afloat. It's currently scheduled to be completed in 2022, but is still facing very serious resistance. In the US, KXL, Keystone XL, had its permits revoked by the Biden administration. And Line 5, which connects to Line 3 and is the one that goes through northern Wisconsin and Michigan and across under the Straits of Mackinac, is already completed, although there's ongoing legal battles since the governor of Michigan is trying to shut it down, and Enbridge is trying to oppose that. So this leaves Line 3. The Line 3 expansion project is completed everywhere except Minnesota, and it's expected to be completed here at the end of summer of this year, according to Enbridge's timeline. So this is the final stand for this pipeline, and the entire tar sands industry is staking a lot on this specific project. So because of that, this is the key fight against the whole tar sands industry right now, and if we can stop it, it would be a huge blow to one of the most destructive industries for the climate right now. Yeah, so it's a pretty important fight. Let's see. Yeah. So besides, like in addition to all of the negative effects on the environment and Indigenous people, land is also actually a bad economic investment. So why is that? Because tar sands companies are operating on increasingly thin margins, which is another reason why Line 3 as one pipeline is such an important intervention point in the entire industry. But anyway, so because of this, quick and low cost transportation is crucial for the industry's survival. And if no new pipeline is built, tar sands will struggle to compete with more efficient petroleum manufacturers. In addition to this, the oil actually just isn't essential. So the Minnesota Department of Commerce concluded that Minnesota doesn't need the oil from Line 3 to function, and that it would not be financially significant for Minnesota's overall revenue. So without sufficient demand and with rising transportation costs, tar sands production will go down, not up. Another thing I would point out is this is another reason why rail isn't really, like transportation by rail isn't an alternative in this situation. Pipeline proponents sometimes like to say, oh, if we don't build the pipeline, it'll go by trains. It won't, because it's not at all profitable. So that's another thing to keep in mind. But yeah, and yeah, the state of Minnesota carries a lot of the risk here. So the refineries in Superior, which is in Wisconsin, the corporate headquarters are abroad. The sand pits, the tar sands pits are in Canada. But if something bad were to happen, Minnesotans would be the ones on the hook. Not only this, the oil industry in general is already on the road to obsolescence. So do we really want to invest in infrastructure that's going to be obsolete in 20 years? And do we really want to build an economy around a dying industry? Like what happens to the jobs when oil prices fall? We need infrastructure and industries that will drive environmentally sustainable economic development, and stagnating industries like tar sands don't drive anything except recessions. From the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity program, sponsored by the UN Development Program, okay, even that organization found that, in effect, the fossil fuel industry could not be considered profitable when all the external costs they hand off are taken into account. So, as democratic socialists, we must also recognize how capitalism as an economic system further exacerbates this issue. The connection between capitalism and climate change comes from energy companies attempting to maximize the utility of their oil reserves and supply before clean energy sources take over the market. And in order to maximize this utility, companies like Enbridge spread false information about climate change and fossil fuels' contribution to it. Because of these targeted misinformation campaigns, serious climate interventions are delayed, and energy companies get to continue reaping profits from their fossil fuel supplies. This is sinister because we've known about the effect fossil fuels have on the climate for nearly 40 years now, but free market capitalism has prevented any government action on the issue. Even a report by ExxonMobil in the 1980s confirmed that fossil fuels would cause environmental issues at such a rate that most economies would not be able to adapt to it. What this shows is that there could have been less profit from fossil fuels over the years, and therefore less incentives to invest in them, as they would have been replaced with cleaner energy through government action a while ago, if not for capitalism motivating politicians to continue supporting fossil fuels through campaign donations, lobbying, and other closed-door deals. We've now seen over and over again that relying solely on the private sector to develop green energy doesn't work because of this profit-utility relationship. Why would companies like Enbridge painstakingly and expensively research and develop green energy when there's still money to be made from oil? The best business decision for them is to seek the options that make the money, and it's easier to make money through an established fossil fuel market than it is to start up a green energy market. All of this has led to the climate emergency we now all find ourselves in. Enbridge is no different than any other capitalist enterprise. The problem is not any particular firm, but the system of perverse incentives and exploitation. There is never any consideration taken into account for the land that we all live on and must use to survive by these fossil fuel companies. Even according to the latest figures from the internal energy agencies, subsidies to fossil fuel producers totaled $523 billion in 2011. For every $1 spent to support renewable energy, another $6 are spent on fossil fuel subsidies. These represent only one element in an overall picture of government finance totaling $1 trillion to exploit the world's natural resources. All of this is only allowed to happen because the private interests of capitalists are prioritized more by the government than the interests of the public. Therefore, since it's clear that capitalism cannot and will not solve these dire issues confronting us, we as democratic socialists believe that it is necessary for us in the United States and across the globe to transition to a socialist economy that will take the interests of working people first and foremost before that of corporations and the financial elite. Only through socialism can we democratically manage and plan the economy to quickly move away from fossil fuels and towards clean and sustainable energy. And I would also point out, this is another reason why DSA's national campaign for the PRO Act is really important, because another argument that pipeline proponents like to use is that we need these jobs. And not only are these jobs temporary, not very many, mostly from out of state, but we don't need those jobs if we can get good union jobs in green industries. So, we need to be thinking about how to create these alternatives and stuff through the action that groups like DSA are doing, in addition to just opposing this pipeline. All right. So, how do we actually stop the pipeline, and what have people been doing so far in the fight against it? So because Enbridge operates by capitalist logic, they will cancel the pipeline project if it's too expensive and no longer profitable for them. That's the main way we win. We make this happen by delaying construction for as long as possible through a variety of points of intervention. So some of these points of intervention, the main ones, are delaying through legal action by the courts, delaying through political action by decision makers who can choose to revoke permits that Enbridge needs, delaying through directly taking action and stopping the pipeline ourselves on the front lines, and delaying through taking financial action such as divestment that hurts Enbridge's margins. And additionally, there's a variety of support work and movement building that must be done to support these fronts of the struggle. So such as education and awareness raising events, kind of like this one, fundraising to support various movement expenses and legal fees, and trainings on how to take action. So let's go through these. Legal pressure and court cases are one way to delay the pipeline. Although Enbridge can appeal decisions and refile for permits if the court rules against them, it can still cause significant delays. It's important to remember, though, that construction can still continue while court cases and appeals are ongoing. Pipeline companies often do that. So if the court rules against them, they can just say, too bad, we already built it, and then just pay the fines, which oftentimes they've already budgeted for ahead of time. For this reason, we also need to pressure decision makers for a stay of construction during the appeals process and take direct action to delay construction as cases are ongoing. So as some examples of how this has worked, earlier in the Line 3 struggle, appeals caused the environmental impact statement to be overturned by the courts because it ignored the possibility of a spill in Lake Superior. And that led to a couple months delay of pipeline construction because Enbridge had to refile their EIS and redo that part of it. Currently, the main ongoing appeals are led by multiple tribal governments, specifically Red Lake, White Earth, and Mille Lacs, various environmental groups, like the ones listed here, and the Minnesota Department of Commerce, as referenced earlier. One key limitation of this point of intervention, though, is that it's not accessible to most people because it requires a lot of specialized expertise and resources in order to get involved in court battles. Like, that's not something that, the majority of DSAers will be able to do. But the next point of intervention is political pressure, which is pressuring formal decision makers to revoke permits Enbridge requires to build the pipeline. Right now, the main target for that is President Biden. He's shown some promising signs of being movable in that he's already revoked KXL permits, and he appointed Deb Haaland as Secretary of the Interior, who is pretty outspokenly anti-pipeline. But it'll take a lot more pressure in order to actually move him. Governor Walz has been a main point of pressure for a few years, But he's shown himself to be pretty staunchly pro-pipeline. We haven't been able to move him, and he's let most of these state permits happen. He still is a target, but he's no longer like really the main target that we're expecting to be able to stop this. The Army Corps of Engineers permits, which are at a federal level, are some of the most important intervention points as far as specific permits. And since those are federal level, Biden's really the main target for that. Yeah, so there's a few different tactics that we use for political pressure. Mostly it's just the idea is to make this issue into a crisis that decision makers can't ignore. Bird dogging is a tactic of just constantly disrupting events and protesting wherever a person goes. Both of these pictures are examples of bird dogging the governor, in which we did some banner drops when he was inaugurated, disrupted some of his events at like the U of M and stuff. The upper picture is the governor's mansion where there's been a lot of protests. Yeah, but just like keeping up that pressure constantly wherever they go. Media coverage is also important to raising the profile of the issue. That can be sometimes just like getting good media coverage of actions. It can also be like writing letters to the editor and stuff, just anything that gets it into the news, gets media coverage. Getting sympathetic politicians to pressure their colleagues can also be a really good leverage point. The politicians like Ilhan and other DSA supported electeds have been good about being outspoken against Line 3. Bernie actually like said he was anti-Line 3 and made statements like during the primary and stuff. But ideally we can expand this more and get even more politicians to pressure like Biden and Walz to yeah. In addition, we can shame past decision makers who've supported the pipeline and kind of use that as an example of how there are consequences. As some examples, one of the things we did in Northfield against Line 3 was a bunch of protests on the houses of Public Utilities Commission members who had approved the permits for the pipeline in like 2018, and just showing up in their houses and shaming them, because even though they don't have the power to make the decision anymore, they still need to face consequences for their action, and that in itself, word gets around, and other decision makers hear about that. But ultimately, the goal is to create a moment of the whirlwind, which is a form of expression that comes from the civil rights movement, and is basically just a situation in which mass national attention is focused on the issue, and it becomes a true crisis that must be responded to. Standing Rock is a really good example of this. And that's kind of like the fundamental strategy is like create another Standing Rock, essentially, another crisis that has to be responded to and gets national attention. These pressure tactics can contribute to that, but ultimately the best way to accomplish that is through frontline action. So this is where we delay the pipeline by physically preventing construction from happening with our bodies. Indigenous organizations on the front lines of where the pipeline is are leading the struggle, hosting camps near the route and scouting regularly to keep an eye on construction. Some of these important groups are the New Collective, which is led by Indigenous women and Two-Spirit people, and it was founded by Tara Hauska, an Indigenous lawyer, and they do a lot of like frontline direct action stuff. Camp McGizzy is a camp that was started by Tasha Martineau from Fond du Lac, who was an organizer with Gitchagumi Scouts, which is an organization focused on countering sex trafficking of Native women in the Lake Superior area, and just like literally like looking for people and stuff like that. And basically, yeah, when Tasha was involved in that, and then when she heard that the pipeline was going to come through their area, she made the connection of the pipeline and the missing and murdered Indigenous women and relatives and started an action camp and has been taking action. Honor the Earth has also quite a few camps up north. They focus on a lot of like awareness raising and like financial support for Indigenous environmental struggles. That's the group that was founded by Winona LaDuke. In addition to these groups, non-Indigenous organizations like Minnesota 350, Northfield Against Line 3, DSA, are supporting these efforts by coordinating with Indigenous leadership to mobilize people to the front lines in solidarity and to take action. What that actually looks like, there's a variety of tactics that this entails. These are just some examples that are listed here. There was a tree sit in where the pipeline route is crossing the Mississippi River that lasted for about like 10 or 11 days and delayed construction. That's what that picture in the top right is. Tree sits have been used in other pipeline struggles too, like the Mountain Valley Pipeline in Western Virginia. That tree sit lasted for over 2 years, I think, and was only recently extracted. But yeah, you just sort of sit in a tree so that they can't build the thing until they extract you and can cut down the tree. Lockdowns are another common example. That's what the bottom right picture is. You just kind of chain yourself to a big old tube that has a bunch of things around it that muck up saw blades, put that around a piece of construction equipment, and then they can't get you out of the way and use that equipment until they can cut through it. Walk-ons are also common. This is a little lower risk, but still oftentimes comes with some risk, especially as things have been heating up. That's where just a bunch of people walk onto a construction site. They can't work because OSHA regulations mean that you can't do active construction when there's people on site not wearing hard hats. And so you stop construction until the cops show up, and then you have to leave or get cited or arrested. So you can't delay it as long as like a tree sit or a lockdown. Those are some examples. You could probably think of other ones. Tripods have been used fairly frequently, which is where you like hang up in the air on a little tripod. Watch the line is kind of a scouting thing where basically you can just drive around the pipeline route and just see what's going on and like log what kind of activity is happening. But if you want to learn more specifics about this, you can come to an online nonviolent direct action training. Northfield Against Line 3 and Rising Tide host these regularly to just kind of train in what does it mean to take direct action and like what's that like. So definitely come to one of those if you want to learn more. There's the links to that are included in the link tree that we'll be sending out. Right now, construction's paused for the most part, although Enbridge is still building pumping stations. But a crucial moment is coming in June, when construction will resume and mass mobilization is required to prevent completion by the end of summer. In June, Enbridge will likely start drilling under rivers, which is a crucial intervention point because a lot of the legal cases are to challenge Enbridge's permits for river crossings. And so we need to stop them from actually drilling under the rivers before we can potentially get those revoked and make it so that they legally can't. It's also a good intervention point symbolically because it's drilling under the Mississippi River, and logistically, it actually delays them by quite a bit if you can stop that in the right way. So that's a bit on frontline action. So one way to hurt Enbridge more directly through finances is divestment. So just getting banks to pull their money away from funding the pipeline. Right now, the banks that fund Line 3 are Wells Fargo, US Bank, Chase, JP Morgan, Bank of America, Citibank, and TD Bank. Stop the Money Pipeline is a campaign to pressure banks to divest, which includes through protests in front of banks like these pictures, and also through getting people to divest from those banks. So like if you're either through personal banking or a 401k. Today was actually a Defund Line 3 global day of action. And there were actions like all over the place. And like I saw some in New York City, Massachusetts, like Nebraska. I saw one in Switzerland. So there's been a bunch of bank actions today, which is exciting. But basically, if we can keep delaying the pipeline's completion through direct action and make just one or two of these big banks pull out of Line 3 project, that could be a huge problem for Enbridge. So that's a bit of an overview of the struggle, and I'll pass it back to Tom for how to get involved.
All right, thank you for reminding me, Rev Mira, that I need to yell at my dad again to move out of Wells Fargo. Join a credit union, everybody. It's important. Banks suck. I'm going to sort of commit the cardinal sin of slideshows, and I'm going to read directly off the next couple slides. I hope that you'll be able to forgive me. We must protect our land, our earth, our collective homes, as well as the rights of Indigenous peoples and nations. The issues that we face can be large and intimidating, but collective environmental struggles like these can connect people across the state, nation, and world. And I will note, because DSA is a Big Ten organization, across ideological divides as well. As we fight Line 3, we have the opportunity to meet others like us and to envision alternatives together. To hope and fight despite the odds is vital and will connect us to build future movements. Next. The Stop Line 3 movement is happening right now. It is an essential environmental and political battle to support and participate in, no matter where we live. Again, forward. All right. This we have shamelessly cribbed from some friends. MN350 maintains a Google document with a variety of resources about Line 3 called the Line 3 Resistance Dashboard, the current version of which you can see we've reproduced here in part. I think the next slide has more of it. Yep, looks like that. We're going to link that in chat. In fact, I will do that right now. Resistance dashboard. So if you'd like to take a look at that in more detail and just, you know, keep an eye on it, that is updated fairly regularly with new information. It has, like you can see, virtual actions, in-person actions, news related to the pipeline, et cetera, et cetera. It's a good resource. Keep an eye on it. There's also, oh yes, there's also the link tree. The link tree, the Stop Line 3 link tree, which I will also grab for you here. This is also a fantastic resource. It has a lot of donation links. So if, you know, if you can't take direct action, but you can give money, that's a good place for it. There are some social media accounts on there and some trainings. In particular, if you're planning to take direct action against the pipeline, I would highly recommend the nonviolent direct action trainings that are put on by Northfield against Line 3. I linked those a little bit earlier in the chat. They're also on the link tree. They are the bottom link on that list. Those are great. Highly recommend them. Go get yourself ready to take direct action. Next. All right. So somebody mentioned this in the chat earlier as well. This is sort of the big ticket item. When construction restarts in June, the plan from the movement at large, there's a lot of groups involved in this particular coalition, MN350, Honor the Earth, Sierra Club, Sunrise, XR, DSA, obviously, among many others. The plan is to have a mass nonviolent action on the pipeline route. Hundreds of people, hopefully, you know, upwards of 1,000 people on the pipeline route itself, to create the moment of the whirlwind that we talked about earlier, and force a response from decision makers. That particular action also has a website, which you can see on screen there, treatypeoplegathering.com. I will also link it in the chat. There's an FAQ about like what the action is, like details about the action, what details exist at the moment anyway. It is still, you know, about a month out. There's also a sign up form on that website. If you're thinking, you know, maybe this summer I can come up to the pipeline route, definitely fill in that form to make sure that like you are fully informed about this particular action. This is supposed to be like the big thing. This is supposed to be the action that forces a response from either the president or the governor. And if it is at all possible for you to come up to the pipeline, I would highly encourage you to do it. We really do need all the bodies that we can get. Will there be a recording of the direct action training? I don't believe, we can probably move on to the next slide because we're sort of moving into questions. So yes, if you have questions, throw stuff in the, throw questions in the chat. Will there be a recording of the direct action training? The direct action trainings that are put on by Northfield against Line 3 are, I believe, not recorded. Yeah, Ramiro would know better than I would, but I'm fairly sure that they are not recorded, but they do take place on a regular basis. So, if you can, I'd highly recommend that you attend one. Links to sign up for direct action involvement on the link tree. That might be on there.
Are the orientation call links on there? Because
yes, and attend an
best.
orientation call for frontlines resistance. Yeah, those are also on there. So
yeah. Oh,
yeah, go for it.
Okay. Yeah. So the best way to sign up basically is to go to an orientation call, and then you can get added to like the list of people who will be contacted when actions are happening.
Consensus. When will orientation calls be taking place? I think those also happen fairly regularly. Yeah, those are weekly. So they're twice a week, Sundays and Tuesdays. I'm not sure what, okay, it looks like, either 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. on Tuesdays or 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. on Sundays. Oh, do they alternate? Oh yeah, it looks like you're right. Yeah,
that would make sense. The trainings do too, so yeah.
Yeah. There are, I believe, four orientation calls that are scheduled in the near future over like roughly the next month. So there should be a variety of times there. If you can't make one of them, you should be able to make one of the others. That's on the link tree, so I can link that directly as well. About that, they are also the fourth link on the link tree. All right. Do we have anything else? Any other questions? I think we might not. Is there anything else that like either of you would like to address?
Oh, I just saw the comment about the consensus from Watch the Line and others is that the construction hiatus is a deception by Enbridge. Construction is still underway all along the route, especially with road restrictions now ended. Okay, that's interesting. People I've talked to were mostly saying it seems like they've actually stopped construction except for pumping stations and stuff. But I think that was fairly shortly after the construction hiatus officially started, so it's possible. So yeah, maybe they are starting sooner. I'd have to ask people more about that. I didn't hear about that.
Watch, it's we're gonna get to like June 1st and we're gonna realize that they already drilled under the Mississippi and we're gonna feel really dumb.
Oh my gosh. I feel like that's the place that's probably being watched most. So yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I can add too, just to quickly re-emphasize at the very end here. that this really is, I mean, if you didn't figure it out already, it really is a national issue for us. And of course, climate change globally affects all of us around the world, but especially here in the United States. Drilling under the Mississippi River, if any of the oil were to leak into the Mississippi, especially since Enbridge plans on constructing under the river so close to the Itasca State Park area, which is the headwaters of the Mississippi River. I believe it's not even 20 miles from the headwaters that they plan to build under the Mississippi. That watershed is so huge that it will affect the vast majority of this country with pollution and devastation. The Mississippi River, of course, connects to other huge watersheds like the Missouri River and the Ohio River and the Red River, among countless others. So even though a lot of this is taking place here in Minnesota, it really will bite all of us in the end if we don't take action on it now.
Well said. So one more time, I'm going to drop in the chat the sign in for this webinar. If you are from an out-of-state DSA chapter, that means that we cannot contact you just based on your registration because you're not on any of our lists. But we would very much like to be able to contact you and make sure that like you have all the information that you need in order to come up north and take action. So like it goes for everybody, but it goes doubly from people in out-of-state chapters to sign in with that and make sure that we can contact you. Other than that, I think we're just about done in the absence of any other questions. I'm inclined to hop off and have a cookie. Any chance there will be a recording of this presentation? The presentation is being recorded. What exactly we're going to do with that recording, I'm not sure. We don't have a YouTube channel or anything. I think Ramira, you'd probably know better than I would.
I've never recorded a meeting before, but I will. I'll try to figure out what's going on with it, and we'll figure it out.
Okay. Well, a recording. TCDSA does have a YouTube. All right. Well, Twin Cities will get in touch. By the way, Tim Schaefer in the chat, if you could wave to everyone. You're a clown for not being up here, by the way. But yeah, so let's assume for the moment that we're not planning for this to go up like on the internet, but if it does, it'll probably be on the Twin Cities YouTube. I think that's a good assumption.
And we can definitely send out the slides.
Yeah,
and if I figure out how
sure.
to send out the recording, we'll do that.
All right. So keep an eye out for this. That's another reason to use that sign up sheet so that we can tell you if there's when the recording goes up. Okay, I think that's it.
All right.
We're good. Thank you everybody for coming. I hope that you will be moved to take direct action, or at the very least to graffiti your local Wells Fargo. I'm joking.
Now we can't put this up on the internet.
Now we can't put this up? Oh no. I swear, FBI, I'm kidding. Don't do crimes, kids. Yeah, don't.
Thank you, everyone,
All right.
for attending and taking
Yeah,
the time out of
Jacob.
your evening to do this. Solidarity forever.
Yeah. Oh, should we sing? Let's not sing. Let's definitely not sing.
Thumbs down.
All right. Well, yeah. Thank you everybody for coming. I think we're gonna hop off here.
Cool. I'm gonna end this.